In this video, I will show you how to migrate your Universal Analytics event tracking setup to Google Analytics 4. Hey, my name is Julius and welcome to the Analytics Mania YouTube channel, where I teach how to work with Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. So if you want to stay up to date with GA4, then consider subscribing to this channel. Migration to Google Analytics 4 is not an easy thing. There are many moving parts and event tracking is one of them. You can choose from several options, but they depend on your current Universal Analytics setup. Also, this is the moment where you might need to rethink your current setup. We have lots to cover, so let's take a look. In Universal Analytics, event tracking was surrounding 3 dimensions and 1 metric. I am talking about event category, event action, event label, and event value. Category and action are required, while label and value are optional. So for example, when a visitor subscribes to your newsletter on a website, you could potentially send an event that looks like this. Event category is form submission, then event action, let's say, is newsletter. Event label is part of the URL of the page where the visitor subscribed. And if you want, you can send value of that form submission. In other words, how much money is that form submission worth to your business? For example, let's say that for my business, every new subscriber, and I mean just the fact that a person subscribed, is worth $3. And that is how event tracking always worked in Universal Analytics. This kind of naming convention was pretty strict. Now in Google Analytics, some things are more flexible, but at the same time, some other limits are introduced. And also this will make you think harder when you plan your naming convention of events. So in GA4, every time you send an event, you must send its name. Then instead of category, action, and label, you can come up with your own parameter names. And then if you want, you can also send value. And when you send value, you should send the currency as well. So for example, if we're talking about form submission, your event name could be named form submission. Or if you take a look at the list of recommended events in Google Analytics 4, and I will post a link to it below the video, here you will find an event called generate lead. It is recommended to use this event name when a user submits a form on your website. But again, you don't have to follow this particular naming convention. You can use, let's say, form submission or new subscriber or some other event name right here. And then when it comes to parameters, you should again check the documentation. Maybe there are some parameters that are recommended for that particular event. But in many cases, when you will be dealing with custom event names, you will also be dealing with custom parameter names. So in that case, we could use something like form type or form ID. And I just came up with these 2 parameters and I could use them in Google Analytics 4. And when it comes to value and currency, I could just send the value and the currency together with that event. So on one hand, you have more flexibility because you can come up with your naming convention. However, on the other hand, there's a limit that if you want to register this parameter and see it in the interface of Google Analytics 4, you will need to use custom dimensions. And there is a limit in Google Analytics 4 saying that you can register up to 50 custom dimensions per Google Analytics 4 property. So you cannot go too unique. For example, if someone submits a form and you send 10 very unique parameters that are named specifically for form tracking, like form ID, form type, form name, maybe something else, and then for some other events you use 10 other parameter names, then you will eventually, pretty quickly, will exceed your limit of 50 custom dimensions. So in this case, you are forced to plan more ahead in order to unify your naming convention. And I will talk a bit more about that a little later. Also, if you are not familiar with custom dimensions in Google Analytics 4, I have a video tutorial and I will post a link to it below the video. Anyway, now let's take a look at the technical example of how you could migrate your Universal Analytics events to Google Analytics 4. And when I say migrate, I basically mean that you will need to create a new configuration for Google Analytics 4. You might find some solutions that will automatically reuse your Google Analytics 4 events and also will adapt them to Google Analytics 4, but I don't recommend those solutions because you lose control and in the end, your new setup might become a huge mess. So I would always look at GA4 migration as basically a new project with a new platform, with a new data structure and new naming convention. So here I am in a Google Tag Manager container, and that container has some basic setup. Here I have a page view tag, and also I have 2 event tags. One fires when a visitor clicks an outbound link on my website, which means that the link will open some resource of another website, maybe will redirect the user. And then here is an event when a visitor subscribes to a newsletter. And then when this trigger is activated, the event will be sent to Google Analytics. So if you already have Universal Analytics implemented in your container and you now want to migrate to Google Analytics 4, you will basically need to create a new set of tags that are using Google Analytics 4. You don't need to create a new container. You can use the same container, and you can start just by going to tags, new, tag configuration, then Google Analytics 4 configuration, and here you will need to paste your measurement ID of GA4. You can find that by going to GA4 interface, admin, then select data streams, your website data stream, and then copy this measurement ID. In this video, I presume that you at least have some very basic knowledge about Google Analytics 4 and you have already created a property. So when you copy that measurement ID, paste it right here, and in the triggering section, choose the all pages trigger, and let's name this tag like this and click save. Now let's move to events. The first one could be outbound click, but luckily we don't have to migrate that to Google Analytics 4 because Google Analytics 4 can automatically track outbound link clicks, and that is part of the enhanced measurement. If you have this enabled and you have outbound clicks enabled right here, it means that Google Analytics 4 will automatically track this. So in this case, you don't need to migrate this. Now let's go to another event tag. Let me quickly show you what are the settings. So this tag is fired when this custom event trigger is activated. So basically what it means is that I have asked a developer to push the email submission information to the data layer when I submit my email address in this form. And when that happens, I will send an event to Universal Analytics where the category is form submission. Then action uses a variable, which is a data layer variable that reads the form name from it. And also it takes the value from the data layer. Actually, let me show you the current setup. So I will click preview in my Google Tag Manager container. Let me submit the email address, click subscribe to updates. Here is the success page. And here I can already see the email subscriber event. So this is what a developer pushed to the data layer. And if I expand it right here, I have form name and I have value. So I have created two data layer variables, one for this and one for this. And now I am using those variables right here. If you have no idea what data layer is, I have some introduction video on my YouTube channel and I will post a link to it below the video. But if you want to really understand how to work with Google Tag Manager, your best place would be to start with my Google Tag Manager course for beginners. So I will post a link to it below the video as well. So when this is pushed to the data layer, my tag fires, and if I click it, I will see what kind of data was sent. Event category is this one, event action was taken from the data layer, and value was taken from the data layer. So how could you migrate this event to Google Analytics 4? Well, first of all, as long as Universal Analytics still works, you should keep this tag in place, and instead you should create a new tag for Google Analytics 4. So click new, tag configuration, GA4 event tag, then in the configuration tag, select your existing GA4 configuration tag, and then here in the event name, you should come up with some name for this event. Since this is a form submission, I can use generate lead. Then in the event parameters, I can include some parameter names that I will find useful. So if I go to the data layer, I have form name and I have value. These are the data layer parameters, and you don't have to use the same name in your Google Analytics 4 setup. So it can look something like this if you want, like form name or just form or something like that. Then in the value, we can use the data layer variable that I have already in my container. So migrating in Google Tag Manager is good because if you already have your Universal Analytics setup in GTM, you might be able to reuse a lot of items in that container, like variables, triggers, and your migration will be faster. So in the value, let's use that data layer variable that I already had from the Universal Analytics setup. Oh, sorry, this is not value. This should be form name because this is the form name. And then I can also send value. And this is the data layer variable. And then when you're sending value to Google Analytics 4, you should also send the currency that is configured in your property. So in this case, currency, and let's use euros. And then in the triggering, I can reuse my existing custom event trigger that I'm using in my Universal Analytics as well. Now let's name this tag and then click save. If your Universal Analytics setup is installed with gtag, then I would recommend for you to move to Google Tag Manager and to install Google Analytics 4 with GTM. So your old setup will be running on hard-coded gtag, but your new setup will be running on Google Tag Manager. That way, in the future, your work will be more flexible. By the way, if you already find this video useful, then consider subscribing to this channel. That way, you will stay up to date with Google Analytics 4. So let's test if this is working. I will click Preview in Google Tag Manager. I will go to this page. We'll submit the form like that. Here is the success event. Then I go to Google Tag Manager, Preview mode, click on Email Subscriber, and here I have 2 events. By the way, if you're completely new to this, your website will not have this event. This is specifically coded for this demo website. In your case, your form tracking might work completely different because it depends on how website is coded. And there are many different ways that depend on the context. So if you want to learn more about how to properly track form submissions, including this method, then take a look at my Google Tag Manager course for beginners. All right, so here I have the data layer event and 2 tags have fired this time. Let's click this one and we will see what kind of data was sent. Form was this value, then value has this value, which is weird. Probably I did a mistake somewhere. So let me just quickly check. Yeah, I used the same variable twice. Let me fix this. Now let's refresh the preview mode again and let's check if this works fine now. So subscribe, submit the form, and let's go to the preview mode. And this time, if I click on this tag, I will see proper values. Now let's go to Google Analytics 4, configure, debug view, and here I will see my generate lead event right here. The reason why in my case it is marked as green because I have configured that event as a conversion right here. But in your case, don't worry, that event will probably be marked as blue. And if I click it, I will see form, I will see value, currency. And now if you plan to use this form in your reports of Google Analytics 4 and you want to use it in the interface, you will need to register form as a custom definition. So you can go to custom definitions, create custom definitions, and then enter something like form name. Here you enter the parameter name, which is form lowercase because that's what I have in this tag right here, form, and then set it to event scope. You don't have to register value and currency because they are standard parameters. So when you migrate all your events, then you will need to obviously submit these changes. That way, this new setup will be activated for your website visitors and you will start collecting data in your GA4 property. Now, when it comes to checking the data in your actual reports, you will need to use places such as reports and engagement and events, and you will start seeing data there within the next 24 hours. So you need to be patient. And then another place is explorations. So that is available in the Explorer section. Here, I would say one of the most useful report for debugging and testing will be Freeform Exploration. If you want to learn more how to use exploration reports, then I will post a link to it below the video. But in general, it might look something like this. So I go to Explore, then Freeform, and now let's say that we want to see the list of all forms that were submitted. So here I could remove rows, columns, and values, and instead I can use event count as value, then event name in the row, and then I will need to click plus and include my new dimension, which is form name. The reason why I don't see it is because I did not click save in that custom dimension creation process. But here you would see that dimension, and then you will need to click checkbox next to that dimension, and that dimension should be added right here from the dimensions section to the rows right here. And then you will see a report where you have all your events, not only generate lead, but all your events, and also you will see the form name dimension as your second column. But the reason why I don't see it is because I did not create a dimension and 24 hours still haven't passed. In fact, I can show you an example with link click tracking. So here I have a click event. So what I could do is that I can check what was the URL that was clicked. And I can do that by going to dimensions, clicking plus, and then looking for link URL, because that is the dimension in Google Analytics 4. Click import, then I add it right here. And then in fact, I can do the right click, for example, here and select include only selection. or I can create a filter manually where I want to see only click events. But to make it faster, I can just do the right click here, include only selection, and here is the report. Here is the name of the event, and here is the dimension link URL that was sent with this click event. So the same principle would apply to the generate lead event. I would filter down to generate lead, and instead of link URL, I would have used form name parameter or form ID or whatever else you are sending with the event. But before you do that, be patient and wait for up to 24 hours. Now, some of you might be wondering if you can just use 3 parameters and register them as custom dimensions, for example, event category, event action, and event label, and thus kinda inherit the naming structure of Universal Analytics. Well, technically, if you want, you can do that. Here you would insert one value, maybe one variable, then another variable, then another variable, and this will work perfectly fine. Then you will need to create 3 custom dimensions, one for event category, event action, and event label. But since we're talking about the migration to a completely different tool, which is GA4, maybe it is a good idea for you to rethink your naming structure. Maybe instead of relying on 3 parameters, you could have, let's say, I don't know, 10, 20 event parameters that could be reused by multiple events. Because let's admit it, in most cases, what I've seen is that in some events, event category means one thing. Then in other events, event category means some other context. And usually event action, category, and label in practice are not consistent. For one event, it might make sense to use this kind of parameter structure, but in other events, it might not. So when you're planning your naming convention in Google Analytics 4, first you could list all your Universal Analytics events, for example, in a spreadsheet, and then try to find some particular parameters that could be shared among multiple events. For example, let's say that I have one event where event category is banner displayed, and then action is dynamically changed, and it depends on what kind of banner was displayed, and the action is the name of the banner, while the label is the banner ID. Then another event could be, let's say, form submission, and then action is the name of the form, while the label is the URL, or actually page path of the page where that form was submitted. So if you have decided to migrate both of these events to Google Analytics 4, your new naming convention could look like this. Event name is banner displayed for the first event, and then we have element name, where we have banner name, and then we have element ID, which is the banner ID. So basically, right now we are adding 2 new parameters, but their values are the same as in action and label. And then when we are talking about form submission, we could also reuse the same parameter, but in this case, it will be form name. So in this context, we would need to have 2 custom dimensions. One is element name, the other one is element ID. And element name is used by multiple events. Because if you decided to have banner name, banner ID, and then form name, you would use 3 dimensions if you want to register these parameters in GA4. So my tip here would be to try to reuse certain parameters and dimensions for multiple events. So don't go crazy with unique parameter names, but also don't try to be too narrow and to have just, let's say, 3 parameters, which are event category, event action, and event label. Because imagine this, let's say that you're looking at the report where the event name is scroll or banner displayed or something else, and you add a secondary dimension, which is event action. What would you expect to see in that event action value? For scroll event, event action might be one meaning, while for, I don't know, form submission, event action might be another meaning. So in this case, work with Google Analytics 4 reports might become more difficult because you won't just remember what event action or event label will mean in different situations. While I perfectly know that element name will be the name of the element that is related to the event. So in this case, banner is a website element. That is why I'm using element name. Generate lead is the event when the form is submitted. So the website element in this case is form. So I know that element name here will be form name, and element name in the context of banner will be banner name. So all in all, try to find the middle ground and make sure that your parameters are kind of descriptive and you can guess what the potential values should be of those parameters and those dimensions, but also don't go too narrow or too broad with your naming convention. And that is how you should migrate events to Google Analytics 4. Keep in mind that event tracking is just one of many things that you need to migrate to Google Analytics 4. I have a very in-depth migration module in my premium Google Analytics 4 course. That migration module alone has more than 3 hours of content. And together with it, you will get my exclusive migration checklist that contains around 100 items. So if you want to migrate smoothly, then take a look at my course. I will post a link to it below the video. If you found this video useful, hit the thumbs up button below the video because it helps me continue working on this channel. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics 4, then consider subscribing to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.